All right, so first things first, we need to add this item cycler script to our scene. So I like to do that on a separate object. So I'll create a new scene object, rename it to item cycler. Now I'll add a component script, and then I will click on add script and choose item cycler. Now I just like to move this up to the top so I always know where it is. And let's jump into it. All right, the first thing to note is that this script component should be set to on awake or on start. So we can cycle through on tap, which is the default, but you don't want to do on tap because that's going to reset every time. So just keep it as on awake. Now let's take a look at this element to cycle. So I'm going to click on this and let's start with scene object. Now you'll see here that we can add some objects here. So I'm going to click on add value and I'm going to click on this box. And let's go ahead and go through the sphere in the box. So I'm going to cycle between these two objects. And let's enable this in our scene so that we see it. All right, so now we have the sphere. That's the first item that's in our list. And if I tap, you can see I switch to the box. And I tap and I go back to the sphere and I can tap and I can cycle through everything. So if you have multiple scene objects, or it could even be something like a post effect, anything in the scene that you've added here, you can switch through it. Next, let's take a look at image textures. So sometimes you're going to have an image, a singular image, and you want to go through multiple textures. So I have this image object here. I come back to my item cycler. I want to select that image. So it is right here. And then I want to choose my textures. So I'm going to choose these hand gesture textures that I imported from the asset library. So I can select these one by one, or I can hold down Shift, select all of them. And here we go. So now we have our image here, and I can tap, and we can go through and cycle through all of those image textures. Next, let's take a look at how to cycle through materials. So let's enable our material cycle example. And now if I click on this render mesh, I can select that object. So let's select this box. And now I can add my materials. And I'll add these here. So I just have two materials here. And it will apply the first material. Now if I tap, it will go to the second material and it will go on and cycle through those materials on the object. So now let's take a look at this advanced section here. So by default, we're going to trigger on tap. And so if we tap, we're going to cycle through, but we can also disable that. Now, if we tap, nothing happens. Now, why would we want to disable that? Well, there are a couple other methods we can use to trigger this item cycling. Now, the first one is going to be receive custom trigger, and that comes from a behavior script. So I'm going to enable that option. Then I need to specify which trigger. So I'm going to call this change item. I'm going to copy this and come over to my behavior script. And I want to, we'll just have a delay. We'll have this come automatically. I want the response type to be send custom trigger. And I want that trigger name to be that change item. Now you might notice that we lost our image texture and we're getting these errors here. That's because the behavior script needs to actually come before our item cycler. So we'll do that so that I can set up the behavior stuff in the lens. And now that trigger can be set up. So let's reset the lens. We're going to watch this carefully. Once I reset, after 1 second, we should see this image change. So let's reset. We have the hand up, and now you can see that peace sign. Let's do that again. After 1 second, that is triggered by this behavior script. When the lens starts, it waits 1 second and sends a custom trigger. Now, if we come back to here, we also have this little note here that this script also exposes a next item function. So let's turn off that custom trigger part, and let's turn on this behavior script, which I've named script API. And we want this response type to be call object API. We want it to call a script API. So let's go ahead and select our item cycler script, and their function name is next item, and we don't need to give it any arguments. And so you can see that it is also changing this here. So it'll reset the lens. After 1 second, when the lens wakes up, it will trigger that change. Okay, I'm going to disable these behavior scripts, come back to my item cycler, And let's do trigger on tap again. And this time, let's say we want to use a button to trigger this. So if I click my button, you can see it cycles through, but that's just because I'm tapping the screen. I can tap anywhere and it is going to run. So I'm going to take this script, I'm going to copy this and actually disable the item cycler. So just to verify, I can tap and nothing's happening. And so I'm going to come to this image here that I've called button. I'm going to add a component. First, I'm going to search for interaction. And then I'm going to click on this little gear and paste in my item cycler script. Now we can either paste it or you can just add it as a new component. It works. So what this does is this interaction means that it's going to watch for a tap interaction on whatever this is attached to, in this case, our image. And now our item cycler script, it's still being called onAwake. Internally, it's listening for a tap event. But now, if I tap out here, nothing happens. If I tap my button, that interaction is being sent to our script to trigger the tap. So now we have this button to cycle through our objects. And if I tap somewhere else, those tap events are not being registered by the script. So the key here was to add the interaction component and then add our script directly on the object we want to be tapping.